Welcome to False Start, a college football podcast for everyone and everyone else. I'm your host tonight, Cody Williams, content director at fansided.com. I am not joined today by John Bueller because we like to alternate. We like to give each other every other Tuesday night off during the college football playoff rankings, but the new rankings are out. The top 25 has been revealed. And we are going to be doing it as we have been for the past few weeks, Goldilocks style. We're going to go too hot, too cold, and just right, just to see where we think the committee is maybe a little too high on some teams, a little too low on some teams, and then of course the teams we think that they're ranking just about right. So let's get into the new CFP top 25 that was revealed. At 1, no change. We have Oregon. At 2, after the big win over Indiana, Ohio State. At 3, Texas. At 4, Penn State. At 5, Notre Dame jumps up after the Indiana loss. Miami is at number 6. Georgia is at number 7. Big winners in this one right here. Same as number 8, Tennessee. Number 9, SMU. Number 10, Indiana. Indiana staying in the top 10 despite the loss to Ohio State. Obviously, the chaos helped them a little bit, but good to see the Hoosiers still in the top 10. And at 11, we have Boise State, who escaped a close call with Wyoming despite being, I believe, 23.5-point favorites. Not what you want, but hey, survive and advance. 12, you have the Clemson Tigers. 13, we finally get Alabama after their precipitous fall following the loss to Oklahoma. 14, Ole Miss after their loss at Florida. 15, we have South Carolina setting up a top 15 matchup in the Palmetto Bowl between them and Clemson. At 16, we have the Arizona State Sun Devils. 17, the Tulane Green Wave. At 18, Iowa State Cyclones. 19, BYU. 20, Texas A&M with another precipitous fall. Missouri at number 21. These rankings committees or voters, whoever, they love ranking Missouri. It's one of their favorite pastimes. UNLV, number 22. Number 23, just look at the I logo. Illinois is at number 23, excuse me. Kansas State at number 24, and then Colorado barely hanging on to a top 25 spot, coming in at 25. So if we look at the bracket, that means we would have Oregon getting a bye as the projected Big Ten champion. Texas getting a bye as the projected SEC champion. Miami getting a bye as the projected ACC champion. And Boise State getting the 4th bye as the highest ranked Group of 5 champion, ranked higher than Arizona State, the projected Big 12 champion. That also would give us number 5 seed Ohio State facing Arizona State. That would give us Penn State hosting Indiana. That would give us Notre Dame hosting SMU, and that would give us Georgia hosting Tennessee. We've already seen that one, so I'm hoping that's one thing the committee can avoid as we seed these teams. I know you want to seed them right and not totally think about matchups, but I do want to kind of, if we can, avoid regular season rematches. I think that's just better for the product, frankly. But let's get into the Goldilocks. Let's start with teams that are too hot, and I don't think this is going to surprise anyone. Penn State's too high at number 4. What are we doing here, man? Like, I just don't. When you look at Penn State and you look at Indiana's resume, what differences really are there at this point? Frankly, yes, Indiana lost by more points to Ohio State than Penn State did. Indiana was also in Columbus. Indiana was also playing in the shoe. Penn State was in Happy Valley. So, like, we're not talking about the same thing here. Like, you lost at home to a superior team, no doubt about that. But you lost at home to a superior team. So what are we like? And then you start to look at the quality wins. Like, yes, Indiana's strength of schedule by the metrics is slightly worse, but it's not that much worse than what Penn State has done this season. And on top of that, we just watched Penn State have a very close call at Minnesota. And frankly, like, that's not the first close call that they've been in this season. That is not the first game where it's been like, ooh, is Penn State really going to drop another one and kind of eliminate themselves from the college football playoff? Outside of maybe the Michigan game, which, yes, on the scoreboard was relatively close, but honestly, in terms of success rate, Indiana was still the better team in that game. Like, Indiana has blown every other team they played out. Penn State can't say that. And the fact that they're separated by 6 spots in the rankings, it's not going to sit right with me. And I'm sure people are tired of hearing me talk about it, but it pisses me off, frankly, because we're rewarding Penn State for not doing anything. Like that bothers me immensely. Gonna get off my Penn State soapbox though. We're gonna move on to Miami. This isn't shocking because Miami was ranked ahead of Georgia last week, but when you start to compare the resumes of Miami and Georgia, who Miami is ranked one spot ahead of, it's really no contest. Like this Miami team, their best win might be Florida at this point, maybe Louisville, I'm not sure, but like you look at the teams ranked in the CFP top 25, they don't have a win over any of them. Miami does not have a win over a top 25 ranked team in these new rankings. Georgia, on the other hand, has a win over Tennessee. They have the win over Texas. So that's a win over two top 10 teams. And their resume is better. Their losses are like their loss isn't to Georgia Tech. I mean, they could lose to Georgia Tech in the regular season finale, but their losses look better when you consider it's to Alabama and to Ole Miss, two teams still ranked inside the top 15. I don't want to reward SEC bias too much, but like Georgia's had to run the gauntlet, and they're projected right now to be going 10-2 through that gauntlet. Miami hasn't had to run a damn thing, nothing close to a gauntlet. They've had to run through a pretty weak ACC schedule, and where you avoided playing SMU and Clemson, the only other two ACC teams ranked in the CFP top 25, and you still lost the game. And you've been in a lot more close calls. Like I don't know. I feel like Miami's being slightly overvalued. I'm I'm starting to get a little bit of a Miami hater gene going here, just a little bit, just because I I just don't see it with this team. Frankly, I think there's a chance they lose to Syracuse on Saturday, but we'll get there when we get there. And then finally, I'm cheating a little bit, but I'm gonna take Alabama and Ole Miss, and I'm gonna put them together as too high. The committee's way too hot on these two teams. Alabama took one of the worst losses of any team in the top 15, except for Ole Miss, who I'll get to in just a second, on Saturday, going on the road, sure, but an Oklahoma team that wasn't bowl eligible at the time, that everyone seems to pretty consensusly agree is one of the lower mid tier of the SEC this season, and they got smoked. I understand it wasn't a huge blowout, but 24-3 against Oklahoma. If Oklahoma had a semblance of an offense, they were basically running the triple option in that game with Jackson Arnold. And if Oklahoma had a semblance of an offense, the way that defense played, they'd have won by 40 because they held Alabama to 3 points in that game. Jalen Milroe looked like he had never played quarterback before in his life. And part of that is Jalen Milroe for sure, and part of it's a credit to Oklahoma. But at the end of the day, you can't, I just don't see how you can have a team like Alabama right on the cusp of this playoff picture with a loss like that, and that being their third loss. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And the same thing applies to Ole Miss, because Ole Miss has two bad losses. I understand Florida's playing better right now, but you lost on the road to Florida when you had everything in front of you. And like frankly, I think what the loss looks like and what the situation around the loss should matter a little bit. And like it was a pressure moment where your one task was don't lose this game, and you lost the game. And you throw that in with the fact that they lost to Kentucky earlier in the season. Ole Miss shouldn't like when they're ranked at 14 right now, there's enough chaos to happen that you could sneak Ole Miss and back into the playoff. I do not think they should be in that position. Frankly, I understand they have the head-to-head win over South Carolina. South Carolina did not have a healthy Lenore Sellers for that game. And frankly, we've seen the committee weigh that before. We saw it last year with Florida State. Florida State did not make the 14 playoff because of the Jordan Travis injury. So the flip side of that is, okay, if one of your losses, which still was to a ranked team, happened to be when your quarterback was playing limitedly and then not playing, you had Robbie Ashford in the game, then I don't know, man. Like, I think South Carolina is a much better team right now and has a lot less damning of a resume than Ole Miss does right now. And the fact that Ole Miss is still in the top 15 after we saw, like, they basically got vaulted in the top 10 for beating Georgia. And then you don't drop them out of the top 15 for a loss like that, that combined with the Kentucky loss is the two worst losses that any team in the top 15 has taken this season. I mean, I just don't understand it, man. That feels like I'm not a big SEC bias guy because I do believe that the SEC is the toughest league in college football. But man, if there was ever a case for SEC bias, it's these latest rankings because Alabama and Ole Miss being in those spots is just egregious to me. And egregious on the other end of the spectrum, we're gonna go a little too cold. And I'm gonna start with Georgia. Kind of, I don't want to belabor this point, but it's basically everything I just said about Miami on the contrary. Georgia, when you look at what they've done this season, I I would venture to say that, and perhaps I'm forgetting someone, and maybe I am, but I don't think I am. Georgia has run probably the toughest gauntlet of the season. They have a 31-point win over Clemson. They have a loss to Alabama, but a loss to Alabama in which the second half they were the better team. Like you have basically you lost a half to Alabama. And I understand wins and losses, they don't measure halves. So fair, you lost to Alabama. You go and you smoked the number 3 team in the country in Texas. 30-15 might be the final score. That game was not that close. Georgia left no doubt on that field in Austin, mind you, who the better team was. Yes, you lost in Oxford and it was a bad, ugly game, but you bounced right back from that and you beat Tennessee pretty handily. In the second half, you came out and you just left no doubt, completely blanked the balls in the second half. Compare that to what Miami's done, it's no contest. Like, we have to reward Georgia for what they did with their schedule. I've said it before, talking with Bueller before. Georgia's task this season to me was you had basically 5 marquee games on the schedule. You need to go 500, above 500 in those games. So go 3-2 in those games to pretty much lock yourself up a playoff spot. You did it. And the fact that the committee, I think my biggest thing, and this is probably just a little soapboxy, so I'll try not to take too much time with this, but my problem with the committee is it seems like they're just weighing different things willy-nilly. It doesn't seem like they're using the same criteria to look at each of these teams. When you look at Penn State, when you look at Miami, when you look at Indiana, it feels like more so than even like in those cases, it feels like they're weighing the logo on the helmet. But that argument doesn't apply then when Georgia's ranked behind Miami because Georgia is a bigger brand. Georgia is a better football team and has a better resume, but you're still putting Miami ahead of them. It just everything that the committee is doing right now is completely incongruent to if you're trying to get the 12 best teams in the playoff and the teams that are most deserving, and you're trying to balance that. That's not what they're doing right now. It feels like they're trying to set themselves up with these as many outs to get the teams that they want to get into the playoff as possible. And it's frustrating. As a college football fan who wants to see the best teams be rewarded, that's a really frustrating place to be in. And speaking of that, and speaking of Miami, why is SMU still removed from Miami as far as they are? A drop from the number 6 spot for Miami to number 9 SMU. Again, when you compare these two teams, what are we even talking about? Like, you look at Miami's resume, and I'm going to pull the schedule up right now so I can fully like unpack what Miami has done here. Okay, so you open the season with a win over Florida. Florida is a much different team right now. Maybe that, like, the committee can argue that winning over Florida, considering Florida just beat Ole Miss, considering Florida just beat LSU, sure. But when they played them in week 1, that was not the same Florida team we're seeing right now. Then you have a win over Florida A&M. Congratulations. Same with a win over Ball State, who went on to fire their head coach, Mike New. Great. You have a win at South Florida, a South Florida team that is bowling. So you know what? That's a fine win. You should have or nearly lost to Virginia Tech at home. You should have, definitely should have lost to Cal on the road. You got into a shootout with Miami, ended up winning by 1 score. Congratulations, you beat a Florida State team who now has 2 wins in the season, one of them being against another 1-win team in Charleston Southern, a 1-win team that's not an FBS. You pulled away from Duke late, but that game was quite close. You lost on the road at Georgia Tech, and then yeah, sure, you beat Wake Forest by 28. That was a 1-score game going into the final quarter. And yes, Miami deserves credit for pulling away in that final quarter. There's no doubt about that. But this Miami team has consistently played with fire the entire season. Now let's look at SMU's schedule. Let's look at their results. SMU's first off, we'll start with the one loss. Early in the season, when Preston Stone was their quarterback, because I'm going to keep harping on that quarterback point, when Preston Stone was still at quarterback, they lost to BYU. Now, granted, BYU has been depressed a little bit because of 2 losses. They've started losing games. So that loss does look slightly worse, still a top 25 loss. And then you make the switch from Preston Stone to Kevin Jennings. Since then, they have a win in the rivalry over TCU. You have a win over Florida State, again, not weighing much in that. You have a close win over Louisville, the same thing that Miami has, a close win over Louisville. You beat the dog crap out of Stanford. You got into a tight one with Duke. Again, Duke, like that's one of Miami's better wins at this point. Duke is an 8-win team right now. Duke is a good football team. You went and you hosted Pitt the next week and you blew the doors off of Pitt in a game that was we thought might be a lot closer than it was going to be. You played poorly against Boston College, honestly, but you still pulled away. And then you absolutely smoked Virginia this past week. How are these resumes that different? And if you're going to put Miami in a spot where they're ranked ahead of Georgia and you're going to have SMU behind Tennessee and Georgia and Miami, that'd make a whole lot of sense to me, man. We're going to finish with a team that's not in the, near the top 12 in the playoff bracket, but dropping Colorado to 25 seems a little egregious. And I'm not trying to be a Colorado homer here because I'm not. Like, I have no ties to Colorado. I think that it's a fun story that this team did turn it around as much as they have this season. But, you did lose to Kansas. You do deserve to be penalized for that. But I don't know, man. If you're not, it just doesn't seem like to me when you compare them to, let's say, an Illinois team or UNLV or definitely Missouri at 21. Like, I just think Colorado has proven more than those teams to this point. And yes, you did take a bad loss. So yeah, I understand being penalized for it. But at the same time, like, you also have to look at the upside and what they've done in other games. And like, I would venture to say that Colorado's done a hell of a lot more than Mizzou this season to this point. Looked a lot better than Mizzou to this point. I don't know, man. The Big 12 will sort itself out. We're not actually worried about that. I mean, how it gets sorted out, that's anyone's guess at this point because there's still 9 teams that are alive for the conference championship game. So things could get a little wonky down here in the final home stretch of the regular season. But thought it was a little egregious that they dropped all the way to 25, almost out of the poll. But let's get to the things the committee got right because we've ragged on them a little bit now. So we'll talk about just right. Where are we just right? Indiana's just right. You had to penalize Indiana for the way that Ohio State game went. It got sideways on them. There's no doubt about it. I do think I still contend that Indiana, in terms of what their defense showed, defense played pretty damn well. Special teams played awfully. Can't be having two special teams blunders that absolutely kill you. Allowing a 79-yard punt return TD and then a muff punt catch, like the punter muffing the snap. It's an odd play, not really sure how you quantify that, but fumbling the snap, giving Ohio State a 7-yard field to score a touchdown. You can't be doing that in that type of matchup, in that type of environment. But again, like I was saying when comparing them to Penn State, the rest of the resume still stands up to me if I'm looking at Indiana. You can only win the games in front of you, and they've won them with a plum. And with the chaos that ensued in the SEC, with Oklahoma beating Alabama, with Florida beating Ole Miss, and with the Big 12 chaos, with BYU losing again, with Colorado losing, Indiana should have been at 10. Like that's where the rankings said they should have been. Because Boise State's resume, like if you dropped them behind Boise State, I would have lost my mind. Because Boise State is out here in the Mountain West fighting for their lives right now. Indiana, the only time they were fighting for their life was Curtis Rourke trying to not die when JTT and Jack Sawyer were coming in his grill. And I was worried coming into these rankings that we would see some shenanigans with Boise ranked ahead, maybe Clemson ranked ahead of Indiana, and in a world that I did not want to live in, with Alabama or Ole Miss still ranked ahead of Indiana, like dropping them that far. So to see him at 10, the committee got it right because with the way things have transpired, Indiana deserves to be a top 10 team in these college football playoff rankings. And speaking of that, I also think Clemson's ranked absolutely properly because Clemson's resume is easy to pick apart as well. You got boat raced by Georgia. But no one's forgetting that because it was one of the marquee games of early in the season, and it was not competitive. Not that it wasn't close, it wasn't competitive. And then you also have the Louisville loss, which Clemson also looked bad in. But They have gone on to have some impressive performances, really blow the doors off some of the other ACC competition that they faced. And now you're in a position where Clemson does not control their own destiny. Clemson can still get into the ACC championship. They're six, we already know that they're a one-loss team in there, but they need Miami to lose to get into that game. So not controlling their own destiny, but you do give them like a little bit of a resume booster because you have a top 15 game against South Carolina coming up. So like I do think Clemson's in a right spot where they're on the outside looking in of the bracket, but they can still play their way in even if they don't totally control their own destiny in the ACC. And I think that's the kind of spot that Clemson should be occupying based on what they've done this season. And then my last team that I think is just right is Texas A&M dropping to 20. And it's kind of a similar conversation to what we're talking about with Clemson, but I think it's even more so that like you look at this Texas A&M team and their three losses, the Notre Dame loss doesn't look bad. You kept it competitive. You fell short at home, which makes it look a little worse, but Notre Dame's a top 5 team. Okay, you can forgive that. The South Carolina loss looks bad because you got your doors blown off in that second half. And now you have the Auburn loss, which looks bad because Auburn's not very good. But Texas A&M isn't like ranked at 20 right now. They are not in position to get an at-large berth. It would take the most chaos possible for that to happen, and like the odds of that are astronomical at this point. But they're still in a like because they're not at risk of being an at large, it's still they're still in a range where it doesn't look completely wonky if they run the table. And by that I mean if they beat Texas on Saturday, that puts them in the SEC championship game. And if they go to the SEC championship game and they beat Georgia, then they're an automatic qualifier. Depending on what happens with Boise, you're probably the 12 seed, maybe the 11 seed. I don't know. We'll see how things go. Well, like, you're not locked into the 12 seed in that regard, but they have the ability to play themselves into the playoffs still, but not as an at large. And I think that's why I like where Texas A&M is ranked because, frankly, I think Alabama and Ole Miss should have been in similar spots, except they don't have that path through the SEC championship game still available to them because of their losses. And so the committee is trying to, thread the needle of trying to, create some drama that they could be an at-large team. They're not trying to create that drama with Texas A&M. It's win and you're in over these next two games, lose and you're done. And I feel like Alabama and Ole Miss should probably be closer to Texas A&M than they are. Maybe I'm wrong, but hey, this was the Goldilocks episode. I'm pretty tired. Been a long week. We'll be back with you on Thursday on an episode we are recording tomorrow morning. So we're gonna get this a lot of podcast recorded in a quick time for the holiday week. But while you're here, please subscribe to False Start on YouTube. Leave us a comment. We will respond to you. If you subscribe, let us know. We'll shout you out on the show. And ask us any question. We love answering fans' questions. So ask us a question. Also go to Apple, leave us a 5-star review. The old fingers, give us the 5-star. And give us a like, give us a follow on Spotify, give us a rating there. But follow me on Twitter or the X, excuse me, at the Sizzle20. Follow Bueller, even if he's not here, at Bueller118. Follow the show at CFB False Start. We will see you on Thursday. Happy pre-Thanksgiving. Enjoy the holiday. And this is False Start.